Just like it happened with so many other people of my generation, I instantly fell in love with Dragon Ball. And I am talking about the original series, not Z, which was what most watched in America and didn't know there was more before it. By then the plot had become the stereotype everybody was copying instead of something completely different from everything else that was airing at the moment. Unless for some reason you were lucky enough to get another action-adventure comedy series with plot continuity, where everybody was a selfish idiot instead of picture-perfect Boy Scouts and one-dimensional bad guys. It's fun to think how Dragon Ball, which came to be the monolith of fighting shonen formulas, began as a deconstruction of the typical hero's journey and the satire of Chinese epics. I won't get into many details regarding the plot, which was all over the place and still full of creativity, and I will focus on its strongest element. Although you can easily separate the cast into good guys and bad guys, most of them were selfish and had their own agenda. They were moving as a group, but they had no unity. This was making it so fun to watch, as you never knew when would someone betray his allies and steal the Dragon Balls. Furthermore, they were so different from one another and had a negative trait to offset their positive one. This was creating a small and very balanced cast with fantastic chemistry during their interactions. And even the Dragon Balls were seen as a way to fix their negative side, so they were in effect a form of catharsis, instead of a cheap way to come back to life all the time. You don't get that as the number of characters increase and their features become less and less distinctive. Also, a big part of the appeal was how everyone was sexually frustrated, which was adding a lot to the comedy and the chemistry. It may not seem like much today, and can even be considered creepy since it involves underage girls getting constantly naked and groped, but back then when it was airing it was very bold and kinky without striking as politically incorrect by excusing it as gag comedy. And the best part is that it never became a lame ecchi show, where they dig each other but always chicken out at the last moment. They were proactive about it, and by the end of the arc, they got what they wanted. Just like it happens with every arc, Toriyama did not develop every concept, which was part of what caused inconsistencies and plot holes down the line. For example, a thing that was abandoned fast was Goku's ability to communicate with animals. It was fun seeing him understand the simple-minded creatures like himself. It was adding to his feral side as opposed to the civilized humanity which was relying on technology. Another dropped idea was the transformation school Oolong mentioned and we never got to see. As much as I am glad there are no schools in the show, having the ability to change your shape would offer an aspect of strategy and deception to the battles. You could say Naruto picked up that idea, and even there you see how creative the battles were at first for being based on deception rather than huge energy beams, and how it lost its magic when it became all about the chosen ones and Sharingans. Just like I said another show, which after a point on, it became all about the Saiyans and prophecies. It's almost as if they repeat the same mistakes. A last thing I want to point out was how short and compact the first arc was. It's only 13 episodes long, 12 if you remove the pinball filler, and the pacing was fast with constant developments. It wasn't letting you get bored, unlike later arcs which are dragging everything to last as much as possible. Thus, as a whole, it was a fantastic arc, and it even ended in a way that excuses a continuation, since it had already introduced Muten Roshi and his wish to train Goku. It's easily a 9 out of 10, with the only negative thing being the pinball filler. Unless you were living in Latin America, this was the first time you would see an animated tournament arc. This is what would popularize it as a concept in the decades to come, to the point people were hyping the completely generic school festival of My Hero Academia. The one in Dragon Ball was still a fresh concept, thus it didn't need to resort to the gimmicks of later arcs, such as getting interrupted before completion once the outcome becomes predictable, or to be used as a cheap excuse to introduce new characters who will be important down the line. The new opponents in the first Dragon Ball tournament were pretty much fodders, so you were watching it just to see how far the established heroes would go. As always, the plot and rules during fighting are all over the place, but unlike the first arc, over here it is a much bigger issue. You don't have rules to follow when you travel in the wilderness. Messy tactics and random events make sense there. It's not the same when you're in a tournament and you get disqualified if you break the rules. Toriyama tried to stabilize a bit the complete chaos of the previous arc, but didn't follow his own rules, as many contestants were using tools or left the arena before the end of the match and were not disqualified. It felt more of an oversight than a gag. A downgrade is how we had less selfish agendas and distinctive personalities compared to the Emperor Pilaf saga. Bulma and Oolong became spectators. Yamcha began his career as the guy who always gets defeated first. Chi-Chi and Pilaf were absent. What was left was Goku fighting everyone who gets in his way, and Roshi who wanted to motivate his students. From new faces there was Kuririn as the new rival, as well as the best character of the arc. Despite sharing the same goal as everyone else in the tournament, he was the only one shown to have an inferiority complex and the only one adjusting to the tactics of every opponent he faced. Compared to him, Goku was a complete blockhead, and Roshi was just there as a mentor instead of an opponent, meaning he was the typical underdog of sports and fighting shonen, in the role of the defterogonist instead of the protagonist. Funny how many call One Punch Man a deconstruction for doing the same with Genos, while Dragon Ball is the monolith despite doing the same 3 decades ago. Not many copycats to be noticed yet, I guess. From the best new character, we move to the worst new character. Lunch was there just for the pervy humor and some fairly one-note gag jokes. Toriyama had no idea what to do with her and eventually made her disappear. Many say he forgot about her, but the truth is he just wanted to reuse her transformation and would feel weird if she was still around. What, don't tell me her turning from a naive black-haired person to a blonde battle maniac doesn't remind you of something? In terms of catharsis, we get some, but it's fairly one-note compared to the Emperor Pilaf saga. There was only the message of Roshi telling his students to keep training because there were stronger people out there. Not a bad excuse for Goku to go find the Dragon Balls in the next arc as part of his training, but also not much for Kuririn or anyone else to do something about it. The pacing was slower in this arc and not many things happened per episode. There wasn't much action or adventure to the most part, as it was either a very long training session or a static arena. Although the training episodes were vital for showing the fruits of their labor, they were also empty of things to care about. It was way better than instantly getting a power-up or skipping training altogether, but something plot-relevant should have been happening in the meantime for making these episodes rewatchable. Thus, as a whole, it was still a fairly good arc, but not as good as the first one, so I give it a 7 out of 10. The Red Ribbon Saga was devoid of character chemistry, making it very boring to the most part. Despite trying to copy the plot of the Emperor Pilaf saga by having Goku looking for the Dragon Balls again, there were no companions with him to make his journey fun. He was meeting new allies for a few episodes, but as soon as he was leaving that place, he would be alone and they would never be seen again. Watching Goku steamrolling his enemies was fun for a while, but it also felt hollow with no allies to add something more to the fights. Toriyama probably wanted to show how after his training Goku was now capable to fend for himself, but that came at the expense of less tension and no multiple agendas. The Red Ribbon villains were all generic megalomaniacs with nothing to offset it. Despite having a huge army at their disposal, they were far less interesting than a comic relief like Pilaf. He had his lack of leadership to offset his ridiculously varied weaponry he was using, whereas General Red had only a one-note joke about being short and wanting the balls to become tall. There was nothing to build from it, and he was disposed of quickly. In fact, all the bad generals were disposed of quickly and were never seen again, just like it happened with the new allies. Despite having plot continuity, this arc felt like a series of standalone missions, since nothing was added or resolved at the end of each one besides Goku getting a ball and the bad guys losing red shirts. I didn't care about Muscle Tower, the sunken pirate treasure, or the crossover with Dr. Slump. In my mind, all these episodes before the introduction of Tao should have merged with the training ones from the previous arc. Imagine how cooler it would be for Goku to be fighting these guys not for gathering the Dragon Balls, but as part of his training while also delivering milk or doing construction work. By the time he was ready to go to the tournament, he would have gained enough battle experience to excuse his place in the finals. Anyways, back to the canon plot. The only thing Toriyama could think of for saving this Snorefest was introducing a fighter stronger than Goku. This begins the transition to the formula we came to know in Z. No more selfish and flawed teams of characters trying to help out each other while also having personal agendas. From here on, it's constantly introducing stronger and stronger opponents for Goku to beat after he trains and gets a power-up. Plus, the Dragon Balls turned into an excuse to bring dead allies back to life, than offering some sort of psychological catharsis as it was the case in the beginning. The show became far more repetitive and straightforward because of this shift. But if I limit my scope to this arc alone, I gotta admit, Goku kicking the crap out of Tao and then storming the enemy base was one of the coolest battles I have seen in my life. Even if it came very late in the arc, it was one-sided and had no strategy whatsoever. As a whole, it was a dull arc with a bombastic finale, so I give it a 5 out of 10. What followed the more satisfying Red Ribbon battle were more boring missions with little to no consequence behind them. First they had this mini-tournament for finding the last ball, which was only about resurrecting a guy we didn't care about and who will not play any part later on. The only true payoff was Goku meeting his dead grandpa, but even that didn't matter once it was over since he also plays no part in later arcs. After that, Goku goes on another trip around the world, soloing nobodies, and we get another bunch of standalone missions with no consequence. Then the second world tournament begins, and you clearly see how little to no engagement there is compared to the first one. It was no longer much of a gag comedy. Goku had already proven to be stronger than Roshi at this point. Kuririn being insecure was hollow once you knew he is stronger than anyone else past the known heroes, and Roshi was there just for the heck of it. They tried to make it seem like he was afraid of killing Goku, but it was disregarded soon afterwards. The new main opponent was Tien, a badly handled character who was introduced in this arc without Toriyama doing something with him or his friend Chaozu in later arcs. He had plans to make him an alien and launch his girlfriend, but after the declining popularity of the series, he scrapped his initial plan and never bothered to even give him a backdrop. That is why, as cool as the final showdown between Goku and Tien was, you were given no reason to care about who wins. They couldn't kill each other, and there was nothing at stake as opposed to the Red Ribbon arc. Heck, the only reason Tien was there was so he could avenge Tao, a guy he didn't even care about. At least he got some catharsis by rejecting his master's command, but even that came before the finale, rendering the outcome pointless. Even the finale was not as good as the one in the previous tournament, since it didn't feel like they were stronger than Roshi. There was nothing remotely close to an Ozaru transformation or a blowing up the moon situation. So why was this arc even made besides having a fighting tournament for the sake of hyping the shonen tards? In my mind, this is where Tao should have been introduced, as a merciless killer who along with his students was paid by the Red Ribbon Army to kill the Turtle Team. The tournament could play out in the exact same way, with Goku vs Tao and the attack on the base taking place after the tournament. It could even end with the Red Ribbon releasing Piccolo in their desperation or something. It would have given far more meaning to the tournament and even an opening for the next arc. Without any of that, it was an almost skippable arc, and I give it a 4 out of 10. The arc starts with a bang and remains sky-high in tension from beginning to end. Not only the new villains can kill even the strongest fighters with a few hits, they also have a personal connection to the heroes. Goku makes it his personal vendetta when they kill his friend, while Orochi was still around when Piccolo attacked in the past and remembers the horror. The death count was ridiculously high, seemingly killing half of the cast, and the battles were brutal as hell for their time. Still, it had become Goku does everything at this point, which was quite disappointing since the secondary characters were completely incapable to achieve something significant or even add something extra to the dynamics of each other. Goku was the one taking everyone out and saving the day by predictably getting a power-up first. The plot was basically the exact same as the one with when he fought Tao, only with more deaths of characters we know and care about. By the way, the latest power-up was one of the lowest points in the series, since it was lazily thrown in and was never mentioned again. No training was involved, all Goku had to do is drink a potion, blah. Still, the final showdown with Piccolo was an amazing fight, and had enough collateral damage to make you believe they were far more powerful than anyone else that came before. If the series had ended here, it would have been the most amazing finale of any shonen period. But it didn't. A great arc nonetheless, with the downsides being the lack of meaningful secondary character interactions and the very lazy power-up. I give it an 8 out of 10. Oh great, another tournament, even more hollow than the second one. If the first one was about Goku and Kuririn testing their skill, and the second about Tien avenging Tao, the third had nothing. None of the secondary characters had something to do or prove. Roshi didn't bother participating since he accepted being surpassed by the new generation. Yamcha and Chaozu were jokes at this point, complete jobbers to be thrown away without a second thought. Chi-Chi was a jobber as well, and also evidence of Toriyama not knowing how to write dynamic female characters. As soon as she was bitten by Goku, she became a submissive housewife and never fought again in her life. And by the way, she didn't even need to fight Goku to have evidence of his superior strength. Just being a spectator would be enough. Being forced to fight was just chauvinistic bullshit. Tao was also a jobber, and on top of that a discount to Tien and Piccolo Jr., since he too was there just for revenge. We are totally not rehashing ideas. By the way, he was still alive for no apparent reason, and became a cyborg without ever explaining how. Great writing there, Toriyama. Furthermore, the only thing he did was making Tien look cool for a while. The once proud, mightiest assassin devolved into a throwaway plot device. Tien had nothing to prove anymore, and on top of that he already knew he had no chance against Goku. Defeating Tao was his best moment, but even that was hollow since he had already denied his past when he disobeyed his master. There was nothing for him in this battle. Kuririn wasn't even afraid this time to the point of stupidity. He gets defeated by a guy he never saw before and doesn't even wonder who the hell besides his allies is powerful enough to best him. The only ones who mattered were Goku and Piccolo Jr., but even they were just there for a rematch. The objective was the exact same one from the previous arc, without something different to make it worth it. Not only that, it took away all the consequences by resurrecting everyone who died and destroyed the serious atmosphere it was going for. There was no point for this arc to exist. What did it add or change? We got an origin story for the Dragon Balls, but it was more like dressing. We got a backdrop for Kami and Piccolo, which retroactively ruined the tension of the previous arc, since it turns out there never was any actual threat coming from Piccolo. If Kami was really afraid of him, he could have simply killed himself, which would have ended Piccolo as well. He could have killed himself to erase Piccolo Jr. as well, but he didn't, because Piccolo was never much of a problem. Kami didn't even need to personally go fight in the tournament, or even train Goku. Mr. Popo was much stronger than all of them put together. He could always move his ass out of that Sky Palace, teleport anywhere he likes with his flying carpet, and capture Piccolo in a few seconds. Goku was taller, and Piccolo looked different, but how did that change their dynamics? I mean, it did change when the Saiyans became a common enemy, but this does not matter in this arc. As a standalone event, it was meaningless and nobody got any catharsis, unless Chi-Chi marrying the guy who was the first to touch her privates somehow counts. Heck, it even ends with Goku letting Piccolo live so they can fight for the third time, while also refusing to be the new guardian deity of Earth. Everything ended the way it began. The filler arc with the wedding was also the worst possible way to end the original series. Here is what I would have done if I had the means to write the reboot. The previous tournament would be interrupted in the finals by the Piccolo spawns. This would leave Tien with a grudge against Goku that wouldn't be resolved until he fought Tao later on. All those who got killed would be minor secondary characters that got shelved by Toriyama, like Crane and Lunch, and do not get resurrected later on. When Goku gets defeated by old Piccolo, he would be taken straight to Kami for training. Piccolo would rule the world for 3 years, and then would arrange a tournament for gathering everyone who would want him dead in one place. Goku and the others would train all this time and join there, with the goal being to take out Piccolo. This takes out the stupid potion power-up and merges the two fights of Goku vs Piccolo into one. As for Junior, his egg could have come from Piccolo when he got killed, promising a rematch when he grows up. There, this instantly made everything 10 times better and doesn't change the overall plot of later arcs. But this is just fanfiction, and the canon is a terrible conclusion to the original Dragon Ball. 3 out of 10. Dragon Ball Z began by retconning a lot of details for the sake of leaving room for a continuation. Gods and demons became aliens. What used to be mystical or magic was now replaced with science and bioengineering. In practice, the original show was inspired by Journey to the West, with Goku being the Monkey King, while Z was inspired by the Justice League, with Goku being Superman. These retcons were not very hard to accept and enriched the setting, since the plot was no longer confined on Earth. Goku and Piccolo were no longer the only ones with such powers, but rather representatives of alien civilizations, each one having its own history and culture. Despite being the strongest on the planet, they were also nothing compared to other aliens out there. Furthermore, for the first time since the beginning of the series, we had multiple agendas and different points of view, which was making everything multi-layered once again. Every major character had something to contribute, the interactions were meaningful, and the plot was not straightforward. But it was nowhere as great as the Emperor Pilaf arc, since there were still many characters existing as background decoration at this point, who ceased having something to do. Such is the curse of constantly introducing more characters, and then doing nothing with them, while also refusing to get rid of them for the sake of selling merchandise. There were lots of other retcons that came off as cheap in the long run. One of them was turning death into something positive instead of negative. First, the Senzu beans removed the recovery time from injuries, then the Dragon Balls did the same for death. What used to be tragic and permanent was now a temporal inconvenience. And then the option to train in the afterlife mutated death into an opportunity to get even stronger by the time you resurrect. It was extra silly when the show was constantly trying to make you feel sad every time a hero was dying, when in effect it was only used as means to make him return with a power-up. It's even more stupid when it's revealed Mr. Popo had a flying carpet that could teleport someone anywhere on the planet. None of the Z-Warriors would have been killed if he had used it to bring Goku straight to the battlefield, or I don't know, extending his training period by a few months, by teleporting him straight on Kaio's planet, thus allowing him to master Kaioken. Death had become fake tension at this point. Another thing that began to break at this point was the power scaling. It used to be easy to follow up until now and made sense in how stronger someone becomes based on progressively harsher training. This was no longer the case, since here on, someone is as strong as the plot wants him to be. A few simple excuses for fixing this nonsense would be the following, even if Toriyama didn't care, and neither did the fandom. Speaking of power scaling, this was also the beginning of one of the greatest misconceptions in the franchise. Battle powers were introduced for seemingly offering a measurable way to tell how strong was someone compared to someone else. It quickly proved to be erratic and seemingly random to have a fixed number, thus it was impossible to trust the numbers of a scouter. Someone could be using a power boost ability or could be suppressing his ki. There was nothing certain about the power level readings. Toriyama gave many instances where it was just a trick for the enemies to underestimate the heroes. The fandom had other ideas and went on trying to calculate and fought over arbitrary numbers for decades after the creator himself stopped using them, since they were, in effect, bullshit. Something else that was always an issue, but never to such a degree, was the train of thought they use for defeating the Saiyans. Why would they go through all this fuss of training for a year and resurrecting Goku, instead of simply wishing from the dragon to make the Saiyan space pods blow up in space? Why risk everyone's life on Earth just to bring Goku back? It was as if everyone had accepted their fate as cannon fodder, instead of believing they could do something without Goku being around to save the day. So if you put all these issues together without letting nostalgia to cloud your judgment, you can easily see why the arc was not that great despite having a very good build-up and a bombastic finale. If I remove a point for every mishap, useless characters, nerfing of death, broken power scaling, and wonky train of thought, I can't give the arc more than a 6 out of 10. The Namek saga is both the peak of the franchise and also the point where it broke its consistency and should have never continued further. The most obvious evidence was the rewrite of what Saiyans were up to that point. Goku used to be a fast learner of new techniques and every Saiyan had a tail. Saiyans no longer having a tail had no in-series excuse, Toriyama simply got bored of drawing them. Without this simple detail, nothing could visually distinguish Saiyans from humans, and removed what was making them special. And I know that you will probably think Saiyans were still distinguishable by their Super Saiyan transformation, but let me remind you that as of then, there was no indication there could be more than one Super Saiyan every 1000 years. And speaking of said transformation, it was essentially a cop-out for beating Frieza. Yes, it was foreshadowed by a prophecy, which is a cop-out on itself, but there was nothing to justify why Frieza didn't kill all the Saiyans despite knowing that, and having way stronger soldiers at his command, or why Goku unlocked the transformation by seeing Kuririn getting killed the second time, but not the first time. There were some indirect rules made up by fans to explain the unlocking of the transformation, such as having a high enough power level at base form and seeing one of your friends dying in front of your eyes. They would all be proven wrong in later arcs, but even during its first appearance, it was all too convenient. What could have easily saved it was the excuse of Guru unlocking Goku's potential with his ability, but this wasn't meant to be. Another downgrade was the plot here on turning into how to get 5 power-ups in the same arc in the least amount of time, instead of spending some time in meaningful characterization. Up until now, a character would need to train hard with a stronger master for getting a power-up. From this arc onwards, this was not necessary since all it took was getting a Zenkai by healing your injuries. Thus another limitation was taken away since now even defeat in battle was a victory. And it wasn't even the only limitation taken away. The Dragon Balls of Earth could only resurrect someone once. The Dragon Balls of Namek could resurrect you as many times as you like, thus making death even less of an issue. As if that wasn't enough, there was also Guru, who could instantly unlock your potential with a simple touch. What most of us didn't seem to understand at the time of watching it in the 90s was the importance of limitations for maintaining tension. Without them, the only way for having tension came through constantly increasing the stakes by making the next villain more and more powerful. And nothing proves this better than Emperor Frieza, who in his initial form alone was eclipsing every mortal in the universe. By the time he got to his final form, for now at least, he was over 200 times stronger, which was completely ridiculous and unnecessary for the fights to remain interesting. Toriyama stopped trying to find a way for a character to need progressively harder means to get stronger or spend years in training with a master. He realized the shonen tards didn't give a shit about a training that would make a power-up feel deserved. They just wanted to see some damn power-ups, goddammit! Thus he just skipped the downtime of training, which was a fine way for the teacher and the student to bond, as well as an in-series explanation for what exactly the power-up meant on a mental level, aside from having the result of punching the bad guy harder. This in effect made power-ups to be hollow and a waste of time despite being instant. Take the Ginyu Force. They offered nothing to the plot and could be removed without changing a thing. They were in a sense the evil counterparts of the Z-Warriors and did help Vegeta to level up, but instant power-ups are not plot and the Zenkai excuse had no philosophy behind it, unlike the earlier power-ups. Nobody was learning something new each time, they were just punching harder than before. Dodoria and Zarbon shouldn't have been foddered from the very beginning. Frisia's foot soldiers and Kui were more than enough to show what a powerhouse Vegeta was before them. Dodoria and Zarbon should have been Frisia's elite men. They were next to him all the time in flashbacks and had a personal history with Vegeta, unlike the Ginyu Force, which was retconned and had no past history from flashbacks. This way the arc could have been 20 episodes shorter, with stronger characterization for the villains, and wouldn't be recycling the constant get injured and healed power-up nonsense. The same goes for Nail the Namekian. What a throwaway character. Powerful enough to take out Dodoria and Zarbon, yet did nothing and abandoned his people to get slaughtered before jumping to Frisia. He should have done more than becoming an excuse for Piccolo to get a power-up. Speaking of Piccolo, the whole plan to waste the wishes on resurrecting him and bringing him on Namek made no sense. What exactly was he supposed to accomplish? How did he assume fusing with Nail would make him strong enough to take on Frisia? The train of thought of the heroes still makes no sense. Nail should be the one doing all that, traveling around the planet, fusing with other Namekians, thus excusing his power. The last thing I have to mention is the pacing. By now the anime was very close to the manga, so they had to slow down the pacing with characters yelling while slowly powering up, panning slowly through backgrounds getting destroyed, as well as making 5 minutes in series to last 5 episodes. We didn't mind it as much when we had nothing better to watch on television, but binge-watching the arc nowadays can be quite frustrating. The Saiyan Saga was at least short in comparison to later ones, which indirectly makes it easier to watch and better as an experience. As a whole, the Namek Saga was like a second Red Ribbon Saga. Lots of pointless episodes and meaningless power-ups, leading to an amazing finale. It also broke the consistency of the show forever after and should have been the ending of the franchise, because everything that followed served only in making it worse as a whole. It was pure hype when watching it without caring about the quality of its writing, but from a critical standpoint, I can't give it more than a 5 out of 10. Toriyama wasn't planning ahead anymore. There was no more thematic continuity and he was making up shit as he went along, often changing his mind midway, based on what editors and fans were telling him to do next. Not to mention how the entire plot was about a time travel, one of the laziest plot devices so you can have an infinite amount of retries to fix something. As much as he tried to make sense of it, he eventually broke his own rules by making Trunks return twice in the future at the same time without causing a paradox. And yes, it is a paradox since a new timeline is formed when you go back in time and not when you return from it. And it wasn't just time travel. Everything was a mess of ideas constantly replacing one another without ever connecting properly or making any sense. First, the big bad was supposed to be Gero, until Toriyama was pressured to make something less ugly. So the big bads became 17 and 18. Not even that pleased the editors, so the new big bad became Cell. And even his design wasn't very likable, so Toriyama was forced to make him look more human. This resulted in some really shallow characterization for the villains, since none had enough presence to be more than filler arc material. Traditionally, the main villain of every arc was giving Goku a reason to want to see him defeated. It wasn't simply because Goku loved fighting strong people, there was always a vendetta forming out of the deaths of his friends for excusing his battle frenzy. No such thing existed with any of the villains of this arc. None of them did something to make him want to kick the crap out of them. Saying they killed everyone in the future is not much of a motivation, since it hadn't happened yet. If he really cared about it, he would have found Gero's lab instead of waiting for the androids to attack. There was no personal connection up until the finale, and thus it truly felt like the heroes were fighting for the sake of fighting. Gero was a one-dimensional idiot who wanted revenge, so he could never be a cool villain. Number 18 had the potential to be a great character, a villain who after an existential crisis becomes a good guy. But in the typical Toriyama fashion, she is quickly turned into a submissive housewife before getting replaced by Cell, the worst written villain yet. He had no history of achievements like the previous big bosses, and had no special powers of his own. He was nothing but a patchwork of other characters. He looked like Frieza and Piccolo, he was behaving like a Saiyan, and he was using everyone's abilities. There was nothing creative about him. This changed a bit in the Cell games when he actively threatened to kill everyone and made Gohan to take it personally, thus finally giving the viewers something to care about. Unfortunately, it was too late to have much significance, and Cell wanting to prove to everyone he was the strongest by killing everyone made no sense. In fact, nothing made any sense at all. The train of thought was all over the place and was changing on every episode. There was no plot, everybody was simply one-upping each other, without the lore or the setting getting more enriched somehow. No new areas, no new themes, and just an alternative timeline that doesn't even matter by the end of the arc. Power-ups were coming one after another, losing their importance in matter of minutes and without ever having a visual escalation. The amount of damage they were causing was always the same, if not less. There was no epicness compared to the previous arcs, since the level of threat shrunk considerably despite everyone becoming a dozen times stronger. Frieza was ravaging the universe for centuries, wiping out countless civilizations. What did the androids do? Fooling around on Earth for 2 decades. Gohan turning Super Saiyan 2 against Cell was a rehash of Goku turning Super Saiyan 1 against Frieza, but it didn't have the same cool factor, because what triggered the transformation was the destruction of a minor android nobody cared about, and everybody else was busy getting humiliated by a bunch of Cell babies. The only thing this arc sort of did right was the interaction between fathers and their sons. Goku and Vegeta were terrible role models, and it was nice seeing them trying to reason with a far more intelligent and down-to-earth Gohan and Trunks. It didn't lead to something significant, and even the sort of passing the torch to the next generation was taken away in the next arc. So as a whole, it was a complete mess, and I can't give it more than a 2 out of 10. In the last arc of Z, Toriyama was given more creative liberty. Things had more consistency instead of constantly replacing one thing with another because of pressure from the editors. At the same time, Toriyama had lost interest in the franchise, since he was rehashing old ideas like Boo being a repeat of the Piccolo setup and the plot mimicking the one of the Android Saga. He didn't even bother to flesh out the new ideas he introduced. Setting and lore were enriched, something which was absent in the Android Saga, but the new concepts were left undeveloped. The older characters were also a shadow of their former glory. Gohan in particular was a huge middle finger, since he was supposed to be the new protagonist. But Toriyama had no idea how to write a smart hero, and Japan seemed to love Goku a lot more. Thus the finale of the Android Saga was contradicted by mutating Gohan into a loser doing Super Sentai nonsense, and bringing back Goku to the role of the protagonist despite claiming he didn't want to return anymore. Vegeta was sort of cool for a while, as he got possessed and killed a lot of innocents before sacrificing himself to protect the planet he came to love. Unfortunately, it was hollow and cheap in the long run. He had killed billions of people in the past, and instead of getting punished in the afterlife, he was allowed to return for the fusion dance. Also, the deaths he caused were taken away when everyone was wished back to life, and his sacrifice was pointless since it failed to defeat Boo. Also, his much-anticipated rematch with Goku was the most pointless event in the arc, since it didn't have the tension of the Saiyan arc. As if by magic, Vegeta was now as tall as Goku and was using the exact same techniques as him, effectively losing everything that was making him stand out. The rematch also got interrupted before there was a definitive winner, so there was no payoff. Also, Goku would have won anyways, since he could go Super Saiyan 3 anytime he felt like it and kick the crap out of Vegeta. Effectively, the rematch was a troll and eventually a waste of time. Speaking of a waste of time, Toriyama was procrastinating at this point by making Goku act like a retard. By not defeating Vegeta right away, he allowed Boo to gather enough energy to be freed, and then changed his mind about personally defeating Boo with Super Saiyan 3, causing everyone on Earth and countless other planets to die. It's the result of Goku no longer having a vendetta with his enemies after Namek, and playing around with them even if it endangers the entire universe. But hey, it's all done for the joy of the battle, right? No reason to blame him for having fun instead of protecting the innocent, as he seemed to be doing in the previous arcs. Turns out he was never the hero most of us thought he was. He was just a battle-frenzy asshole. As before, the plot was just the characters constantly one-upping each other with power-ups that were cheaply acquired, were not used properly, and were losing their importance in a matter of minutes. And this time it was worse than in the Android Saga, because defeat meant getting absorbed by Boo, thus making him stronger the more they were trying to become stronger. By the time they managed to defeat Boo through a convoluted combo of wishes, I just wished the damn thing to end. Speaking of Boo, he was suffering from the same issues as Cell, not having any personal connection with the heroes as Vegeta and Frieza had. Because there was no vendetta, Boo had the mentality of a baby, Goku was just fooling around and death had lost its meaning, the story had become a playground for man-children instead of a sinister plot full of tension and suspense. Unlike Cell, Boo had a personality, although it was closer to multiple personalities coexisting in the same body. It was a good idea at first, showing how his emotions can make him flip-flop from one persona to another based on how he was treated by others. But just like every good idea after Namek, it was ruined because Toriyama stopped giving a shit. The hints of complexity Boo's personality was showing were taken away when he divided into good and evil bodies. It became a clear case of help the good side and beat the evil side. And even the evil side reincarnated into a good guy later on, thus making good and evil to lose their meaning if they can flip-flop so easily. The only good part of this entire mess was Mr. Satan and his interactions with Boo. They were funny, tactical, and far more meaningful than the father and son interactions of the previous arc. Yes, Satan was introduced during the Cell games, but he was just comic relief and filler material. It was in this arc where he became a part of the plot and manipulated everyone for his personal gain. And he did it without ever becoming a villain or needing a useless power-up for beating the bad guys with brainless force. He was essentially more heroic than the main heroes, who at this point were procrastinating and looking for excuses to fight, instead of using their brains to stop the bad guys with something other than useless power-ups. As a whole, I consider the Boo saga to be slightly better than the completely throwaway time travel bullshit no personality Cell, but not by much, since it's still a complete mess with very few good parts to make it worthwhile. I give it a 3 out of 10 and wish these two last arcs would fusion dance into one. Their plots were pretty much the same. Cell was Boo, Gero was Babidi, Trunks was Kaioshin. Most of the characters had pretty much the same role, or none, and doing so would improve characterization and minimize the time wasted on useless power-ups. Toriyama had gotten so fed up with the franchise, he only made the character designs and left Toei to make whatever plot they could think of. The result was a mediocre show many came to hate as non-canon, since Toriyama, the genius of good storytelling, did not write a bunch of bullshit for somehow making the show any less terrible than it had already become. It's kind of hypocritical on part of the fans to call it awful when most of them kept making fan fiction and fan art out of GT, regardless of not being canon. All it mattered was getting more damn Dragon Ball, goddammit! So let's stop complaining about something most eventually accepted as an excuse for writing and drawing, Toyotaro included. The beginning of GT was somewhat promising, as it had to do with looking for the Dragon Balls all across the universe with a time limit before Earth blows up. Goku becoming a kid again was an attempt to power him down so he wouldn't be spamming his teleport ability or defeat everyone with Super Saiyan 3. There were still issues with the premise, such as retconning an extra set of Dragon Balls found by Pilaf in Kami's palace. Entering a place no mortal can simply walk in was a plot hole. But it was not the first time the plot didn't make any sense, and not even the biggest problem of GT. What really damaged the overall was how plain it was. Toriyama may have foddered everyone who was not a Saiyan in Z, but he still bothered to show them trying to do something, as useless as it was. Toei didn't even do that. By now, there were 24 super powerful heroes on Earth aware of the situation, and nobody seemed to care much. They just sent 3 children to gather the balls and did nothing thereafter, as if it was not a big deal. That was the actual problem with GT. It didn't know what to do with its cast. Even if you try to evaluate the story as a simple adventure with a small cast like back in the beginning of the franchise, it was still not good because the characters were not selfish jerks with character flaws trying to backstab each other for personal gain. They were a team of generic good guys facing every danger with a common goal in mind, and even the challenges they were encountering weren't threatening as the villains were easy to defeat. It became somewhat more interesting when Baby, what a name, was introduced as a major threat, a life form who could not only steal powers but also possess anyone he was touching. His goal of avenging the deaths of his civilization at the hands of the Saiyans was also very interesting, as it was leaving an opening for the heroes to have a personal connection with something from their past once again. Technically, he was a much better version of Cell. Vegeta in particular could be facing the demons of his past when confronting this guy. Unfortunately, nothing of the sort happened. The only change Vegeta got was a lame mustache. And Baby didn't force anyone to consider the vanity of fighting, since he was simply brainwashing them with a touch. Mind control doesn't leave any room to get philosophical. As if that wasn't enough of an issue, Goku was the one defeating him, as always, and not only he didn't think about the constant problems his battle frenzy was causing, he also defeated Baby with another power-up that came seemingly out of nowhere. Super Saiyan 4 was, again, an interesting concept, as it was bringing back the Saiyan Tails and, in theory, was the next logical step in their evolution, as they could stack their giant ape forms atop their Super Saiyan forms, while also having control of their battle frenzy. This could have been the ultimate answer to what Baby was representing. And again, nothing remotely smart came out of it. It was just another generic power-up Goku used for defeating a villain. The ending to this arc was bizarre, since they failed to save the Earth. This could have been the chance to make humanity turn against the Z-Warriors in their frustration for losing their planet and having to relocate elsewhere. And not even that was treated like something important, since they kept living on a completely different planet and that was the end of it. So basically this entire arc was a constant middle finger, as it kept throwing all these great concepts at you without ever bothering to do something with them. The next one about Super 17 was so lazily written. Somehow the gates of hell open, somehow the bad guys build another Android 17 in hell, and it somehow needed to fuse with the original for getting a power-up. What was this bullshit other than an excuse to show Goku fighting Frieza and Cell again? And even that wasn't any fun, since they only used a freezing machine of all things, the lamest thing ever. And as before, the dead came back to life, which was technically the apocalypse, yet it meant nothing for the characters or humanity as a whole. There was no gravity behind these events, as if everybody had been completely desensitized. So what was the point of even making this crap? Because the shonen tards wanted to see more damn Dragon Balls, goddammit! Predictably, the last arc with the Shadow Dragons suffered from the same issue. The Dragon Balls became evil after being abused for so many years and turned into monsters aiming to destroy everything. The heroes were facing the consequences of their pride and vanity. What did they do about it? Nothing! They just sent the same kids to fix everything, since nothing matters. And seriously, as the strongest and final opponents, the Shadow Dragons looked so lame. How were you supposed to take them seriously when they looked like shit and were waiting to be defeated one at a time by a bunch of kids? The final showdown between Gogeta and Omega Shenron was fun on a superficial level, but it had none of the energy of the earlier arcs. Everybody was moving so slowly despite getting constantly stronger. Super Saiyan 4 was nerfed to the point it can be achieved with a simple machine, and Pan was a useless addition, being there just for making embarrassing jokes. Even at the very end, GT proved to be full of good ideas that were never used properly. It was a shameless cash grab with no passion for whatever was going on in it. That's why it's so bad and deserves no more than a 1 out of 10. 15 years after GT, Toriyama decided that he wasn't making enough money from all the poorly created video games, card games, and countless types of merchandise that were constantly being produced based on his badly written franchise. So he officially labeled GT to not be canon and that Super is the real sequel, in effect rendering worthless terabytes of fan fiction and fan art. He still hired Toyotaro as his best imitator, and the one doing all the drawing, since he couldn't be bothered to draw as he used to. The result was a lifeless continuation that could no longer excuse itself being bad because Toriyama was not part of it. It was also not really a continuation, since that would demand a new story with new characters in order to start fresh and avoid all the inconsistencies that piled up over the years. But who would buy that? We live in the age of sequels and franchises that reboot every few years. Toyotaro ended up tracing over Toriyama's artwork and kept bringing back all the old moves and characters, regardless of not making any sense. It was basically fan service for nostalgia fags, and it worked spectacularly, since many idiots ate it up immediately and called it amazing despite being a shameless cash grab.
Is Dragon Ball Super worth it? If you watch my weekly reviews, it definitely is worth it. It's continuing to get better and better. You can pretty much skip half of the material. Dragon Ball Super is a treat for the fandom. It's really getting to enjoy the characters that you miss, because a lot of people after GT, they, really didn't have anything else. That's the reason to go watch Dragon Ball Super, just to see, hey, is Goku gonna die? Vegeta's gonna die? Time and time again. A lot of people wanted to see for many years. So in a sense, yeah, you can regard it maybe as a little bit of fan service, but why not enjoy what you love? We wanted to see our characters again, and here you go.
I want to see some damn Bankais, goddammit.
It's just insane to see how popular Dragon Ball has become. Close to what it used to be back in the day. Shueisha ain't playing around. They know that there's big money with this. Hey, we can have Dragon Ball slippers, Dragon Ball t-shirts, Dragon Ball condoms. Like, yo, came on the heels of Naruto ending in an attempt to kind of continue having some sort of big fan base. We need to get something to get those fans and once again keep going. Let's throw Dragon Ball back. Super is going to go for a long time to come, because why would you kill it off if right now it's at its height? Dragon Ball creator Akira Toriyama commented on the new department saying that it's really great that I don't have to do anything now. This man never ceases to amaze me. I love the fact that Dragon Ball is humongous right now again, having a bit of my childhood back, and at the same time as an adult I could look at Dragon Ball as a franchise from a different perspective.
So everything began with a pilot movie called Battle of Gods. It was mostly comedy and had another terribly handled power-up. They had 15 years to take out the power creep which ruined the franchise, and not only they didn't do anything about it, they instead made it worse. The new villain Beerus was not even a villain, but rather a cosmic bureaucrat doing his job. Really badly, I must add, since not only he slept for millions of years, he also wasn't around to stop supervillains when they were threatening the universe, and instead all he did was blow up planets that didn't have tasty food. He was essentially a comic relief with ridiculously high enough power to destroy the universe with a few punches. And somehow they managed to scrap even this simple character by constantly contradicting what he did in the past. What baffles me is how they rewrote his backdrop story from the one who made the Saiyans evil to a generic destroyer of worlds looking for some excitement by fighting the Super Saiyan God. This removed the personal connection he could have with the heroes, since he would be the one who kick-started their battle frenzy. Without that, he was just another guy who wanted to fight for the sake of fighting. He even goes as far as letting the heroes turn Goku into a Saiyan God, proving how little he cares about everything besides mindless fighting. And I have to point out the plot hole with the prophecy. The reason he knew there was a Saiyan God out there is because of an oracle fish which foretold it a million years ago. How can there be destiny in a universe with multiple timelines? Future Trunks came from the original timeline where everybody had died and it was impossible for someone to acquire the God form. Thus this whole concept was bullshit. The legend of the Super Saiyan may have been a convenience for Goku to defeat Frieza, but it wasn't contradicting the in-series logic, unlike the prophecy of the Saiyan God. And that's why it's proven once again why destiny and time travel are some of the worst plot devices ever conceived by man. Anyways, back to what was supposed to be a plot. The battle between Beerus and Goku was the most anticlimactic thing ever. Because of modern limitations, they couldn't show gore and violence in the same volume as they could in the past. Everything felt like a video game because it wasn't hand-drawn anymore, and the terrible low budget of the TV version made it laughable in the eyes of everyone who was simply looking for a cool fight. Many voice actors were also too old at this point and couldn't do their job properly. Kaio in specific can barely talk, so when he's supposed to be screaming, nothing comes out. And even Goku's voice actress shows her age way too much at this point. You can easily tell it's an 80-year-old lady. How can you enjoy this? Not even the conclusion was satisfactory since Goku lost, and Beerus did not destroy the planet because he liked the food. And he didn't barely manage to overpower Goku either. Even in his god form, Goku was a billion times weaker than Beerus. Essentially, this battle was a troll, since there was no way for Goku to win despite making it seem he stood a chance. This continues the terrible tradition of characters holding back from using their full power right away and making it seem they are equal in power with whoever they are fighting. This first arc of Super was terrible! GT may have been awful for not knowing how to use its good ideas, but at least it had good ideas. Not only Super does not have good ideas because it's rehashing the exact same shit worse than before, it also contradicts its own concepts every 5 minutes and keeps trolling you with fake tension. It doesn't even deserve a 1 out of 10, it was an abomination that should have never been made. Even these heart-shaped potatoes are more fun than Super.
This movie does not continue that story. It sidetracks for the sake of rehashing old plotlines and throwing in even more lazy color swapping power-ups, because who cares about continuity anymore?
Anyway, it's about Frieza coming back to life and seeking revenge against Goku. That's all there is to it. Something he already did with his father in the past, as well as what his non-canon brother did in the movie. It's not like I expect originality out of Dragon Ball. The damn thing is a monolith of fighting shonen formulas, and it has stuck to it for 30 years. What does annoy me a lot though is how Toriyama screws up such a simple plot. I mean, this is his creation and he knows how stuff works better than everyone else. And yet here we are with characters acting out characters and the rules of how Dragon Balls work changing out of nowhere.
So okay, some bad guys make a wish to bring Frieza back to life. Why does he come back in pieces? Nobody else had that issue, even back when wishes had far more limitations. And why are all the good guys doing nothing despite sensing Frieza's aura? I mean, seriously, at this point they can fly anywhere they like in a few seconds, and even a bottom-ranked fighter like Krillin is around Frieza's power level at this time. So why are they standing still for several minutes when they clearly sense someone summoning the dragon, bringing back a major villain, and then leaving in a spaceship? They were always flying into battle in previous arcs the moment they sensed something was off. They could have just sent a nobody like Yamcha to sneeze on the bad guys before they even made the wish, and the movie would have been over in like 10 minutes.
Hell, they could have simply kept all the Dragon Balls in a secure place so the bad guys wouldn't even be able to make the wish in the first place. But no, they just let any random villain to gather them and wish for whatever the heck he wants. Something which is so easy to do these days. Back in the good arcs, it would require months to find them all. Nowadays, even a comic relief villain like Pilaf can do that with no problem. Twice. Out of screen. And nobody gives a damn.
Anyways, Frieza is back and he wants to kill Goku, just like every other bad guy wants in this show. But he also needs to get stronger in order to do that, since he became a small fry even back when Goku had yellow hair. Now that Goku got red hair, Frieza will need to get a new power-up that can top even that. And he acquires said power by training for a few months? Yeah, that is all it took to get a million times more powerful. He was simply out of shape and needed to get into a fitness program. And he did it off screen too, because who cares about training sessions anymore? We are all here to see dumb people punching each other.
So a few months later, Frieza attacks with a bunch of minions and we get the typical part where all the non-Saiyans try to hold off the bad guys because Goku's not around to do it himself. In earlier arcs, he was too far away or still recovering from his injuries, so taking time to get to the battlefield was excused, but no such thing happens this time. He can teleport anywhere he wants in an instant, he is not injured, and he has the Kaio available to inform him about anything that is going on with telepathy. And yet no such thing happens for several hours. It's as if everyone forgot how to use their powers all of a sudden.
Anyways, the cannon fodder fights, and as always, they're not trying to win or even weaken the enemy boss, they're just wasting time until the only people who matter in this show after Namek arrive, which are Goku and Vegeta. Duh. And holy crap, the power levels now make even less sense. Since when are we supposed to believe some of the minions are weak enough for even Roshi to beat, while others are powerful enough to land punches on Piccolo and Gohan? What the hell? If such powerful aliens exist, why was Frieza their leader? Or why did they bother to resurrect him? If they already had stronger successors to take over his position, what's the point?
After this completely meaningless battle scene, Goku and Vegeta finally arrive because Bulma, of all people, bothered to inform them about Frieza. They are cocky enough to fight Frieza one-on-one instead of ganging up on him and ending the battle right away. Or, I don't know, letting Beerus, who is even stronger than them, to finish him off. Oh right, he's busy eating desserts, what a great character. What, you thought our noble heroes are here to save the earth, protect their friends, or something trivial like that? Nope, they are here to have fun by punching stuff. And eat pudding.
What follows is Frieza revealing his own personal lazy color swapping power-up, followed by Goku doing the same with yet another lazy color swapping power-up. Yellow is so last century and red just got old last year, so let's try blue this time, with a wonderful name to go along with it. Super Saiyan God Super Saiyan. No, this is not a typo. Then the final battle happens where Frieza is completely owned despite his fitness program. Do you know how lame it feels to see all this build up amounting to nothing? And they didn't even fight for a couple of hours like before. It only lasts a few minutes. And it all ends when one weak minion shoots Goku with a simple laser. What the hell is this crap? The guy could survive nuclear explosions before he even had yellow hair, and now he has blue. He gets heavily injured by a pistol? That's bullshit.
But worry not, since now Vegeta can take on Frieza and prove what an amazing warrior he is by essentially finishing off his half-dead opponent. But he fails at that even, losing his chance to take revenge after all of these years because he was too busy laughing at how strong he is instead of just killing Frieza. Frieza takes advantage of that by blowing up the earth while everyone is busy doing nonsense. By the way, this is something that he could have done all along without even having to land on the planet, but of course he didn't, because if that happened, the movie would have ended way too soon.
Anyways, the Earth is destroyed for yet another time, and it seems everybody died, but plot convenience says otherwise since now there is time travel all of a sudden. Goku can go back in time and undo anything that wasn't done properly, thus having an even easier way to fix any harm the villains caused. Forget the healing beans, the dragon bringing the dead back to life, he can now simply load a previous save file and try again. Hooray for tension.
Thus, Goku defeats Frieza before he blows up the Earth with his trademarked Kamehameha attack, something he could have done all along but didn't. By the way, why isn't the solar system vaporized if Goku fires energy beams at this level? I mean, even in his initial form, Frieza could blow up planets with a finger. How come Earth is not blown apart by Frieza, two God Saiyans, Beerus and Whis, simply breathing on it? Whatever, power levels are bullshit.
Thus ends this completely pointless movie, so we can rewatch it all over again 10 times longer and with crappy animation thanks to Dragon Ball Super, milking for the win. And who knows, maybe Goku will get purple hair after this arc and call himself Saiyan God Saiyan Super Duper Kamehameha Saiyan Lucifer Super.
Watering bell peppers is more fun than Dragon Ball Super! This arc had absolutely no stakes or tension. It was just a small tournament with the only penalty for defeat being the Earth teleporting to a different location. That's so terrifying for a civilization that has no space travel technology yet. Muten Roshi blowing up the moon back in the second arc was a bigger calamity than this one. And why the hell did they even need a tournament if the dragon could grant them anything they wanted? Since there was no tension, the writer had to make up a lot of fake-outs for maintaining the interest of the audience with constant trolling. Also, the heroes had to constantly sabotage themselves in order to make it seem the opposition stood a chance, which was quite insulting once you realized it's all nonsense. Even as a tournament, it didn't have much for you to care about. The opponents were all weak enough to be defeated by Piccolo, with the exception of Hit being somewhat of a challenge for having a broken power that allowed him to level up just by looking at his opponents. And even that wasn't really a threat, since despite being an assassin, he wasn't allowed to kill anyone, effectively killing all the suspense. So why did they make this arc if it had nothing to offer? I'll tell you why. So they could add more characters in Xenoverse too. How else would they trick the fantards to buy the same game if not for having a bigger variety of versus battles? The franchise fell so low to the point where instead of having toys being made based on the series, you have the series being made based on the toys. My god, this was easily the worst written arc in the entire franchise, yet the fantards consider it to be the best because it was giving them every bullshit they wanted to see for decades.
Dragon Ball Super, baby, bringing in that A-game shit. Super is keeping it very serious, taking some of the classic comedy elements to pretty much make things a lot more funnier. Did they fuck up the hair color scheme or something like that? Because this is a dire situation, you know, they're fighting for their lives. Why did it take that long to get to them or whatever? It's like, at most you could say a mile or two away or whatever. I wish it would get explained more, but we're probably not going to get an explanation. Goku was training with the turtle for how many hours? And Trunks learns it in one go. That's not an explanation. What the hell? I mean, at this point, doesn't really matter because money. People are actually kind of pissed off about Goku from Dragon Ball had kids with his wife. It sounds ridiculous. We live in a world where Goku hasn't got a kiss, but Ash Ketchum has. You know, the eternal 10-year-old got a kiss before a grown-ass fucking man. It's something new for Ash's character, even though he'll totally forget about it in the next season. Like, she won't even exist, and the cookie continues to roll. Money. They are doing a Dragon Ball spin-off manga about Yamcha. It's going to be about a high school kid where he ultimately is reincarnated as Yamcha. You know how he died at the hands of the Cybermen? He can avoid that. He can also avoid getting his bitch taken by him, so Trunks won't be born. It definitely feels like this is more of an adult Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball Super must be just absolutely exploding right now. Money. Are you excited for a Yamcha-filled story? An amazing time to be a Dragon Ball fan right now. I loved every step of the way. I can't wait to see what happens next. For a Dragon Ball fan that's gonna get the references, totally recommend.
Remember this, remember that.
This shit was awesome for Dragon Ball fans because it has a lot of little neat references.
Remember this, remember that.
A fan definitely did this. He knows all these neat little references.
Remember this, remember that.
If I fell down some steps and broke my wee little neck and I was reincarnated, I would be Yamcha.
It's more in your head. It's more cerebral. It's different. It's something that's personal.
I honestly think a lot of people would pick this over SAO, No Game, No Life, and all those other series that do the trapped in another world or in a video game or something like that because it's that damn funny. the Yamcha manga was thought up over drinks. Yeah, man, how about a Yamcha manga? Yes. They're making these pretty big decisions over some drinks. They thought of doing a Reborn in Another World story a la Log Horizon and figured one using the Dragon Ball world would go over very well. Because at the end of the day, it is kind of, you know, a serious deal. The story with Krillin and some sort of time loop was also in the run. Toriyama actually approved this. Put direct deposit the check, please. And gave several suggestions such as outlining the protagonist's personality and having him die in a funny way. So yeah, that sounds totally Toriyama. The response has been huge. It got over twice the readership of a typical one-shot. People are really eating up this Yamcha manga. I mean, anxiously awaiting the second chapter. From a marketing standpoint, that's genius. Shueisha is getting hip to the times of how to do things. Everyone wins. It's like the fans win and Shueisha wins with money and shit. Dragon Ball decisions being made over alcohol.
As a result, nothing made sense, especially the time travel gimmick became more broken than ever.
Dragon Ball Super on fire, baby. I'm loving it right now. It definitely feels like this is more of an adult Dragon Ball in a sense. Darker than anything we've seen in Dragon Ball, probably in its entirety. It feels as though Dragon Ball with this arc grew up with us finally.
On episode 58 of Dragon Ball Super, Toriyama proves once again how little he cares by turning the characters into mouthpieces for the audience. Most of the episode is spent on theory crafting, where they speculate how Zamasu came to be so powerful and traveled in time, which is exactly what most Dragon Ball fags are currently doing anyways. You know you're a sellout when you make your characters behave exactly like your pretentious overthinking audience. What makes things even worse than that is how even the result they reach based on the theory crafting makes no sense. And I'm not even taking into account how they don't have to speculate anything, since they can simply ask the guy who knows everything. The whole time travel mess during the Cell Saga was convoluted, but you could still draw a line of events that had a beginning and an ending. The time travel of the recent arc, on the other hand, is an infinite loop. It has no beginning or end, therefore you cannot escape it or prevent it without somehow creating another timeline through time travel. And yet the characters, although being aware of that, behave as if they can prevent these events from happening without using time travel. They just go to talk with Zamasu, thinking they can stop him in time, although they know he has already become evil in this future. They cannot stop him because it has already happened in the timeline. This in effect creates a paradox within a paradox, since both the situation and the solution used by the characters count as the predestination and grandfather paradoxes respectively. It's so obviously bullshit, and yet the Dragon Ball tards act as if it's an amazing mystery with the best written villain of all times. Terrible writing, awful fandom, no critical thinking whatsoever. They are just watching for the sake of watching.
I need it!
The only thing the writer cared about was throwing in as many cameos and callbacks as he could, instead of trying to make a coherent plot.
Your wishes have been finally heard, Blade Stars. In the recent episode of Dragon Ball Super, there is a god of death who creates weapons out of himself, opens a portal to a different dimension from which evil creatures are popping out. There is a guy making weird poses, people constantly teleport behind their enemies, everybody can level up his level up, and the creator doesn't give a shit about the plot anymore. In other words, Dragon Ball has officially become the new Bleach. Money. In the recent episodes of Dragon Bleach, Trunks learns new techniques such as Mafuba and the Gallic Gun without any training whatsoever. Half of Zamasu's body is not immortal despite fusion being a complete melding of two individuals. Goku proposes fusion, something he had forgotten to do all this time, just like he forgot to bring the Sensu Beans, the seal for the Mafuba, or press the Zeno button. All of a sudden, fusion is not permanent anymore, although that is not what we see in Dragon Ball Z. Then Vegeta fires a final Kamehameha, an attack that is not even present in the series because it was used only in video games. The same video games which contradict the whole concept of time travel being a scene that the gods do not allow. Then the fusion ends because they used up all their power, which makes no sense since God Ki is supposed to be healing them instead of wasting their power. Then Trunks creates a spirit bomb unconsciously, even though he never learned that attack and had zero experience about it. He then absorbs the spirit bomb and uses it to unlock his Bankai, without of course explaining how he could do that. And that defeats Zamasu, the villain who didn't simply wish from the dragon to kill all mortals and be done with it. Perfect writing. In the meantime, the only thing the shonen tards are complaining about is Vegeta not fighting for a whole hour and defeating the bad guy.
It's like an adult Dragon Ball.
The villain consumes the universe after he is defeated, because that's what happens when you defeat a villain. He consumes everything without having to explain how he did it. Explanations are pointless in Dragon Bleach. Thus the villain manages to kill everyone in the universe by simply allowing the good guys to win, which means it was pointless to be fighting them in the first place, since letting them defeat him would accomplish his plan right away. Also, whatever the good guys were doing throughout this whole arc was pointless, since winning or losing against the villain would have the exact same result. Then the hero solves this problem by pressing a button and summoning the God of Everything, something he could have done all along, but instead preferred to waste dozens of episodes in doing pointless nonsense that had no effect. The God of Everything doesn't exist outside of time, since he doesn't know of Goku in this timeline, which means it's pointless to call him the God of Everything when he doesn't control time. So the God of Not Everything destroys that universe, which renders whatever Trunks accomplished in this arc by getting 4 power-ups in a row and releasing his Bankai to be completely pointless, since he failed to save his world. It also renders pointless the hundreds of fanboys who are desperately trying to defend the countless ass pulls this arc had by saying it was all about hope instead of logic. Trunks gathered all the hope of this world and managed to save it, thus giving us a perfect closure. Well, not anymore. Then the heroes go back to their timeline by simply grabbing the time machine instead of getting inside of it, rendering pointless all the limitations of space it had so far with the glass cockpit. Cell didn't have to turn into a smaller lizard in order to fit inside, he just had to press the button while grabbing the machine from the outside. Then Goku takes the future God of Not Everything to the present God of Not Everything in order to become friends and play with each other, which makes no sense since they are both the same person and thus do not count as friends. It's the same person playing with himself. Then, with some convoluted nonsense, the gods send future Trunks and future Mai to a different timeline where the villain never became a threat, rendering pointless the tragedy behind the destruction of their universe, since they are simply giving another one to live in. The thing is, there will already be a Trunks and a Mai in that timeline, which means there are now doubles of the same characters in different timelines, making death being even more pointless than it was already, since even when someone dies, you can simply fetch another one from a different timeline. Also, the big fuss that we're making all this time about the gods considering time travel to be a grave sin is now also pointless, since all of a sudden the gods are fine with having 2 gods of Not Everything and sending people across time on their own. Thus it is once again proven how terrible this anime is and why time travel makes everything pointless, because it resets everything and creates nothing but paradoxes and contradictions. It also proves me right when I was saying no matter what the characters are doing in this show, it is pointless because it means nothing in the long run, and yet the fanboys downvoted me for stating the truth. Do you know what is the only thing they were saying?
Did you get them feels? Did you feel what I felt? That shit hit me in the feels so deep. An amazing time to be a Dragon Ball fan right now. I loved every step of the way. I can't wait to see what happens next.
The last arc of this dreadful show had absolutely no planning. The only concern of the writers was to cram as many characters as possible and have them doing as many callbacks as possible, so they can ponder the brain-dead audience with as little effort as possible. There is no plot to speak of, since it's just random duels happening in whatever order the writers felt like at the moment, so I'm just going to describe how the participants were treated as means to prove how little thought there was in this horrible excuse of a finale. So, in order of elimination, we start with Boo, who was not even in the tournament because the authors realized his powers were broken. He could turn opponents into candy or heal his allies instantly, thus defeating pretty much everyone on his own, while taking away any sense of tension, since nobody would be running out of energy or even getting injured. This is also why throughout the series they were constantly keeping him out of the action by making him fall asleep or not knowing how to write his name. It clearly shows they didn't plan anything ahead when they gave him a new power-up right before the tournament and then changed their minds and had him falling asleep again. The funny thing is, the heroes could have simply taken him to the hyperbolic chamber so he could be awake by the time the tournament begins, but conveniently nobody thought of that. By the way, Vegeta blowing up the chamber was not an excuse for not putting Boo inside, since nobody knew Vegeta was inside, nor mentioned the possibility of using the chamber for speeding up his nap time. In retrospect, it was a mistake not including Boo in the roster, since he would be a fine excuse for why Goku and Vegeta were running out of energy, only to magically get it back after a few seconds over and over again. As for the rule of not allowing healing during the fight, they broke every rule 100 times, so let's not use that as an in-story excuse. You don't need any more proof regarding that than seeing the flying fighters. Flying is not allowed unless you got wings. Well, if that's allowed because it's a natural ability for them, then so is Boo's healing power since it's something natural for him. Also, what was the point of this limitation when everybody was constantly hovering and jumping and teleporting all the time as if they were flying? It didn't matter at all if they were on ground level or not, since they were constantly using energy blasts from afar to knock out someone, thus rendering distance inconsequential. As for those who were flying naturally, it didn't give them any benefit whatsoever. That parrot guy was easily blasted out, that bat guy jumped out on his own, and that pixie bimbo literally forgot how to fly. So what was the point of not allowing flying? They had no idea what they were doing with it. Then it was the whole attacking Goku from behind gimmick, which got so old by being used all the time. Goku, like the complete dumbass he became in Super, was constantly being immobilized by someone grabbing him from behind. Something that is impossible after being able to sense someone from the other side of the universe, and is 1,000 times faster than light. But hey, we need that fake suspense to make it seem like he can't defeat everyone in a second, so let's make it seem like he's unable to free himself right away. And let's have the excuse of saving up his energy. Yeah, because he totally needed not to waste his energy. Something he did 20 times and ran out of it a dozen more, only to magically get it back after a couple of seconds. And the most insulting part was the orc-looking dude who tried to sacrifice himself for taking Goku out of the ring. That is something most of the Z fighters did. It was always heroic and tragic because they were characters you knew for decades, and also a cool way for them to leave the ring. But when a nobody like this orc dude did the same, nobody gave a shit because he was not a Z fighter. Even the show made it seem like it was nothing important because the guy was cannon fodder. That's how little the writers cared about everyone who was not an established character. Then it's the cheating when it comes to some of the powers. A wolf guy could poison even the strongest fighters, but because Goku had seen his power in the preliminaries, he knew how to avoid it. Meaning the preliminaries existed only for nerfing Universe 9 during the tournament. The Wolf Brothers were capable to take out most others, yet they were treated as complete fodders. One of them forgot he could become huge, and the rest assumed they could surround a guy that can teleport, or someone who couldn't escape by simply jumping away. Universe 9 was treated as a complete joke, when this is not what they were showing us before. This is where the first deletion of a universe happened, and every shonentard was losing his shit for no reason. Oh my god, the stakes have never been higher as entire universes are being destroyed and there is absolutely no way for them to be wished back at the end. Oh my god, Goku is a villain since the universes are being destroyed because of him, although this was not his idea since Zeno was planning on doing it, even if Goku hadn't said a word. Oh my god, Goku's going to get character development when he realizes the destruction his battle frenzy causes, and will unlock the next power-up because of it, although he never had and never will have any character development, because this is a crappy shonen for people with low expectations. Oh my god, the angels are evil because they look really sinister and want to destroy everything, although they behave differently in every episode, thus you can't be sure about anything. Oh my god, something terrible is gonna happen at the end because Toriyama is out of ideas and is spreading lies just to keep his brain-dead audience watching. Then there are cases of plain stupidity, such as that time Android 18 needed to make sure someone was dead by coming closer. Turns out he was faking it, which was obvious, since if he wasn't, 18 would have been disqualified. You gotta be a real retard to fall for that. And then we got the first KO for Universe 7. Despite Kuririn being in the team for creating a new blinding attack, and for somehow being as powerful as Super Saiyan Blue, because power levels are bullshit and Goku is too stupid to know how to hold back, none of that mattered. His blinding attack was less useful than a smelly shoe, which by the way that counts as a weapon and he should have been disqualified. Not that anyone cares about the rules in this damn tournament. Anyways, he loses because he dropped his guard and not because he was overpowered. We can't have one of the established heroes losing in a fair way. That would make him look weak. No, it has to be an unfair sneak attack by a bad guy. Something which, by the way, shouldn't have happened in this case because A. The bad guy was 100 times stronger than him, thus didn't need to sneak attack him, and B. Android 18 was right next to him covering his rear, therefore it shouldn't be possible to be sneak attacked. How stupid is this bitch? The next part they completely messed up has to do with hyping anyone who was not an established character. There was this huge disconnect between making many of the opponents seem threatening and actually being handled as such. It's part of the fake suspense this entire series overflows with. They were constantly exciting you to expect every fighter being challenging, only to see them getting defeated very easily. I'm telling you, Reddit was full of topics where people were having dreams about the amazing powers every single one of those nobodies will have, only to get 30 seconds of throwaway folders. The hype was so high, shonen tards were constantly dreaming about the potential of this arc. And there is nothing wrong in making it seem like the opposition stands a chance, but it's anticlimactic when it turns out nobody outside of Jiren posed a threat. He was clearly the final opponent, as the opening was constantly telling you, yet these stupid promises of amazing fights from others was making it seem like there was more to it, when there never was, and the show itself never tried to make anyone else that important. And the problem is not just how nobody else was treated fairly, it also has to do with how they were behaving when they were facing an established fighter. At first, they would be heroic and kind-hearted, but as soon as they face a favored warrior, they would magically become evil and petty. The writers were so unwilling to show psychological pressure by presenting everyone fighting for the survival of his universe instead of being good or evil, to the point they were rewriting noble opponents into bad guys so the heroes would seem heroic by defeating them. Because this way it doesn't feel tragic when you have to kill countless people by defeating their heroes. No sir, they are assholes and they deserve it. That was super lame when Gohan was the only one aware of that. They were constantly making it seem like he was devastated by the destruction he was causing and why he was supposed to be holding back all the time and have his ass kicked around by nobodies. Every time it was happening, it seemed like he would get character development. Everyone expected him to fight seriously afterwards, and to unlock the next power-up thanks to his newfound determination, only to completely forget everything after a few minutes, go back to getting his ass kicked by nobodies, and never unlocking the new power-up the show was constantly hyping you about. All because the writers were refusing to show actual psychological pressure in an arc that was demanding it. After that, we had the defeat of Tien, someone who was there just for the heck of it. Toriyama gave up on him ever since the original series, and Super simply continued the tradition of treating him as garbage. It says a lot when he was ridiculed in every episode he was supposed to get the spotlight. First, he's made to look like a fool by a little girl with weak powers. Then he's defeated by a grandpa he had surpassed decades ago. Then he drops his guard in the tournament as if he doesn't have decades of battle experience. And finally sacrifices himself to take out a complete nobody Goku could defeat in a fraction of a second. But no, they had to make it look like Goku forgot how to teleport, and thus couldn't appear behind the sharpshooter and defeat him without Tien having to sacrifice. We needed Tien to look heroic by making the protagonist act like a complete retard. And by the way, this is another blunder about the arc. There were many last-moment saves for some characters and not for others. There was no logic in how someone could save a comrade from falling off the stage in one scene, but be unable to do the same in another scene. It would happen whenever the writers felt like it instead of when it was possible to happen. Why didn't Goku teleport to save Tien from falling? Why didn't Kunshi or Jimizu use their powers to save their fighters more often? It would make sense if they were shown being preoccupied with other fights, something which never happened. Everyone was supposed to be fighting at the same time, when in reality the action was mostly duels with everybody else disappearing from the stage for 20 episodes. Basically, the storyboard was complete shit, since everyone appeared and disappeared at random, and you never had any idea what the rest were doing in the meantime. And since it was Universe 7 who defeated almost everybody else, it's as if the opponents were doing nothing for 20 episodes, besides patiently waiting for their turn to go against Universe 7. I understand that it would be impossible to show 80 characters fighting at the same time, but that begs the question. If the writers couldn't do it, why didn't they make a traditional tournament instead? Nobody would be appearing and disappearing all the time there, interesting duels wouldn't be interrupted at random, and nobody would be saved from falling off the stage whenever the writers felt like it. So the moral message of the story is, if you know you can't do it, don't do it! The next defeat was Roshi, who despite being handled much better than any other member in the team, was still terrible in overall. Despite giving up on fighting way back in the original series, he magically becomes super powerful by watching porn. Training in secret, my ass. He was doing nothing but watching porn for decades. He mutated into a rapist who sexually assaults every girl that is near him, something he never did in the past. He defeats Tien, someone who was stronger than him since the day he was introduced and who was training non-stop for decades in actual martial arts. He uses the Mafuba in the tournament multiple times, which is a double cheat since not only he didn't die from it, as he did with King Piccolo, but he also used vials for trapping someone inside. Those count as weapons, and he should have been disqualified because of them. So many idiots were defending this as legal because the vials were part of the technique, which makes no sense, since with the same logic, someone could use a nuclear warhead by using the technique known as activation button finger attack. And going back to what I said about the writers refusing to allow psychological pressure, Roshi is about to die from his injuries, but Goku jumps in and resurrects him by simply giving him energy. We couldn't have some actual tension by seeing a hero dying for a few minutes. And why the hell did they need senzu beans all these years when giving energy has the same effect? I will tell you why. It's because the show watered down the violence so much to the point injuries became the same thing as getting tired. There is almost no blood or bruises anymore, and energy attacks are only pushing someone out of the ring, when in the past they would have disintegrated him completely. Since injuries no longer exist, you don't need senzu beans anymore. Just give some of your energy to a tired companion, and that is enough to become fully healed. So basically, death lost its meaning a long time ago, and now so did injuries. At this point, the writers decided to get rid of Universe 6, so they were making up excuses for taking them out in the dumbest ways imaginable. The first big shot was Frost, who was all about trolling since day one. He had the twist of being a good Frisia, only for a second twist to undo the first twist, and he was just like Frisia all along. In the Tournament of Power, he teamed up with Frisia, and everybody was theory crafting a million nonsense regarding who they will double-cross and how powerful they will be as a duo, only for the whole thing being yet another troll. They never teamed up to do anything, and Frisia eventually double-crossed him in the most anticlimactic way. Why did he even need to fool Frost into lowering his guard by kicking the crap out of Gohan when he was 1,000 times stronger than him? What happened to the whole "we need to save up our energy" when they wasted their energy and time on this completely pointless trolling? That's what happens when you create a character whose only defining feature is trolling. The writers didn't know what to do with him, so they destroyed the credibility of anyone who was interacting with him as well. Gohan was once again shown to be incapable to deal with someone way weaker than him, and Frisia was wasting energy and time when they were supposed to be fighting for survival. Also, it was proven once again how the rules make no sense and everyone can break them whenever he feels like it. Frost was erased for attacking someone from the bench, when everyone else was constantly throwing weapons and giving their energy from the bench without ever being punished. The second big shot was Hit, who in the classic tradition of this horrible series, was completely nerfed compared to his previous appearance. He didn't defeat almost everyone with his time skip ability, and he didn't constantly power up just by looking at stronger opponents. In fact, he was defeated so easily, to the point many shonen tards refused to believe he was out of the ring, and were making up bullshit theories about him still being on the stage by using clones or some shit. The next ones were Kale and Caulifla, who sum up everything that is wrong with listening to your fans. Creating gender-swapping imitations of non-canon characters who power up with no training or effort from normal form all the way to Super Saiyan 2 in less than an hour. Somehow getting no damage from a Super Saiyan God Kamehame, but 1 minute later having trouble with a Super Saiyan 2. Not getting disqualified for using the Potara, or not using the Potara right away to defeat everyone in 1 minute, and instead assume neither of them is going to get knocked out by the time they decide to use the earrings. Something which happened almost twice before the fusion, by the way. And of course, Goku and Vegeta really want to save up their energy, which is why they trained their enemies in the middle of the battle by wasting their energy in making them stronger and harder to defeat. And Kefla really wanted to save her universe by taking out the strongest enemies, which is why she was playing with the other Saiyans the whole time, instead of teaming up with them for taking out Jiren. Top-notch writing! And finally, there were the two Namekians, the definition of mishandled characters. They were super powerful, they had perfect teamwork, they used tactics, they didn't limit their attacks to one technique, they never dropped their guard just because, they never held back for having a fun battle, they didn't become villains the moment they went up against Universe 7, they didn't do something ridiculous such as powering up in the middle of the fight, or heal instantly when they were out of stamina, and they did not break the rules by using weapons. Despite all these assets, they were hiding throughout the tournament for no reason. They didn't even bother to take out a few nobodies while in stealth mode. And on top of all that, the rest of their team acted like they didn't matter until they were the last remaining on stage. It's almost like the writers didn't have a clue about what they will be like up until the episode they introduced them. It's almost like instead of fleshing out these infinitely better written than even the main hero's characters, they wasted their time in gender-bending fan service Saiyans. These Namekians should have been the main focus of Universe 6, and they only appeared for a single episode. But why should anyone pay attention to those nobodies when you have excellently written characters like Ribrianne, a parody of magical girls whose only defining feature is making the exact same joke about love? She repeated it in almost every goddamn episode despite getting old after a few times. Not even her powers were interesting, she had the most generic attacks with the word love in the name to further make her more obnoxious. She didn't even use teamwork with the other members of her team, despite never shutting up about love and compassion. Everybody hated her for all the screen time she was getting, and cheered when they finally took her out. But again, why would you give focus on the well-written Namekians when you have characters such as her? After all this mess, most of the remaining known heroes were taken out in a hurry and in very anticlimactic ways, because the writers were suddenly told they only have a dozen episodes to wrap up this travesty. This begins with Piccolo, who was once again nothing more than a surrogate father for Gohan, even after decades had passed and he had become a family man. Because why would you do something new with a character when you can just rehash the same shit and sell based on nostalgia? After being nothing but support the whole time, he gets pushed out of the ring by a bug because we can't have an established hero losing fairly by a nobody. Then number 18 gets kicked out after doing nothing but supporting others and never standing out on her own. And she does a pretty crappy job at it, since she fails to protect Kuririn's back, and her heroic sacrifice to let her brother stay on the stage was fake feels. Since just like it happened with Tien, Goku forgot how to teleport, thus he didn't know he could save everyone he wanted all the time. Then Dispo and Gohan are taken out in lame ways, since for some reason being the fastest in all the universes is not fast enough to avoid getting trapped by a bunch of beams, and being promised to get a power-up throughout the arc means nothing. Also, Gohan, what happened to your reliant self? You were supposed to no longer be a crybaby after you became a Super Saiyan 2. Now you went back into a scared man-child who refuses to take part in a fight because of a business meeting and constantly needs Piccolo to give you courage. Where did your character development go to? Also, Goku forgot how to teleport again, so he couldn't save you. Toppo was the next one to be taken out in a stupid way. He was yapping about justice the whole time, only to contradict himself at the end by going God mode and completely flipping the only thing that was defining him. He was equally shallow and annoying as Ribrianne, but this character rewrite is not an improvement. Also, he was overpowered in the most boring and direct way without some sort of strategy to at least make it worthwhile. I mean, what's so special about God Key if a mortal can still kick your ass? Was it that hard to make him lose by being tricked into erasing the ground under his feet? Or wiping from existence one of the opponents, thus getting disqualified? Getting overpowered by a lazy power-up was the most unimaginative way to defeat someone. They even contradict the in-series logic since, despite being able to wipe from existence anything he attacks, Toppo somehow lost to a mortal who was using attacks he should be able to delete easily. The one who kicked his ass was Vegeta by getting a power-up that was never explained or excused. What the hell is Super Saiyan Sparkly Blue? The perfected God Key form? Then what the hell was blue in comparison to red? And he unlocked it because he was thinking of Kaba, a guy he hardly knows and is hell-bent on becoming his mentor, although he is currently dead? How are you so sure you'll see him again, and what about your family or the survival of your universe? Those are not important anymore? And what happened to that catharsis you supposedly got in the Buu arc when you accepted Goku as your superior? You went back into rivaling him as if you never had any development as a character. Once again, they are rehashing the same ideas without developing new ones. After that, there was only the final showdown where the last 3 fighters were taken out at the same time, so I'm going to talk about them separately. Starting with Frisia, the best villain in the entire franchise, now ruined by the terrible way he was handled. He was initially resurrected for a rehash of the beginning of the Android saga, only to be killed and resurrected again as a replacement for Boo. The only reason it happened was because people don't like Boo as much as Frisia. Strangely enough, people don't like Tien that much either, but he couldn't be replaced for some reason. So in the tournament, Frisia was constantly trolling everyone, mostly doing nothing but looking at others fight, and occasionally taking out a few nobodies. Then, with the power of friendship, he becomes a good guy at the finale and teams up with Goku to take out Jiren. What the hell was this trash? Frisia was special as the bad guy who never became good, and now he became just another background ally, along with the other worthless Z fighters who were once enemies and opponents. And they even bring him back to life as thanks? Despite being a backstabbing sadist, personally responsible for the death of 99% of all sentient life in their universe, and who was planning to wish from the dragon to become the next god of not everything. How do you casually redeem something like that with the power of friendship? This is bullshit! Then we had Jiren, the most boring and forgettable antagonist in the whole franchise. He had the most generic face, he was just super strong without using any interesting techniques, his backstory was an unoriginal Batman Revenge ripoff, hastily explained in a few minutes, and he was doing almost nothing throughout the tournament despite being able to defeat everyone in a few seconds. He had some bullshit excuse about not wanting to be responsible for the destruction of a universe, and yet he was in a tournament for the sole purpose of erasing other universes. He constantly sabotaged his own team by not helping out his companions, and he constantly didn't bother to kick out the ones he fought. And what did you know, he suddenly becomes evil in the finale, when he was calm and stoic throughout the tournament. Power is everything all of a sudden, and he proceeds to show how unheroic he is by beating the crap out of an exhausted Vegeta. Well done, writers, you really outdid yourselves there, not making Vegeta getting overpowered fairly, because that would make him look weak. Then we have Goku, who is a culmination of every problem in the show. It's summed up as acting like a complete idiot for purposes of fake suspense, fooling around with his enemies instead of taking the situation seriously, and constantly getting his stamina back a dozen times after he's completely exhausted. This is done mainly because there was no way to excuse Goku not defeating everyone right away, as was the case in earlier arcs. Without him being incapacitated for a long period of time, the writers were making up silly excuses for why the obvious thing wasn't happening. But since people are watching Dragonball for the damn power-ups instead of the writing, Goku eventually gets 2 new hair colors that make him even more powerful than ever before, even when he has no energy left. Holy shit, how much more plot armor can they give this guy? He wins even when he's losing! And of course, none of that had anything to do with Goku getting character development because he stops treating the tournament as a joke. Because that's what everybody expected to happen after being constantly told something terrible is going to happen at the finale. And finally we have number 17, the best character of the arc. Not because he was the best written, obviously, but because he won. As far as writing goes, he was a complete mess just like the rest of them. He was absent from the show since the Cell arc, and all of a sudden he reappears as strong as Super Saiyan Blue by doing the impossibly hard training of being a park ranger. Yeah, that's all it takes these days to jump to god levels. Next thing you know, the farmer with a shotgun will be stronger than Zeno by shoveling manure. Back to 17, he was the voice of reason throughout the tournament, and was not fooling around like the rest of the idiots did, which is why he was such a cool character. But in reality, the writers just made him perfect when he was just a barely looked into character. He didn't have any of the pragmatic features in his first appearance, and now all of a sudden he's a mastermind with exceptional hearing. They went as far as making him able to hear the tiny bug not even Piccolo could hear with his keen senses. In the finale, dumb shit happened and he decides to make it seem like he died to protect Goku and Vegeta. I don't understand why he would do such a thing, since even if he wanted to attack an unsuspected Jiren later on, he wouldn't be able to scratch him no matter how strong the attack would be. In fact, if he had lowered his energy barrier and allowed Jiren's attack to actually kill him, he would have tricked Jiren into getting disqualified and Universe 7 would have won the tournament. But we couldn't have something smart like that, and we instead had the dumb shit of hiding for a couple of episodes for a weak ambush to take place. And the arc ends with a terrible ending that Toriyama promised everyone would happen. What could this terrible thing possibly be that is more devastating than the destruction of most universes, which are totally not going to be wished back? They just wish the universes back and everyone lives happily ever after. That's the fucking terrible thing Toriyama was hyping you for. Zeno goes as far as admitting he was planning to bring back the universes anyways, and he wouldn't allow evil wishes to be granted, so the most devastating destruction in the history of the franchise was a joke all along. That also means Goku and anyone else who were being idiots and fooled around the whole time are now justified, because there never was any actual threat and it was always a game. Fuck the show. Just fuck this show! I'm not going to bother with plot holes, since the movie retcons the backdrop of the Saiyans, as well as a character who was not canon up until this point. No matter what I say about the changes, it won't matter in terms of continuity, and it's not the first time Toriyama changed the origin of the Dragon Balls or the cause behind the destruction of planet Vegeta. I'm going to limit my impressions to plot aesthetics and say the way Saiyans are portrayed now makes them look like pansies. The 90s Saiyans were badasses who only cared about fighting and killing. There was no love and compassion or any of that nonsense. These here are soy boys, written that way to appeal to the new generation. Pretty much the same thing that happened to superheroes in comics. A weird thing about it is how it doesn't feel like a movie. Unlike a series, it doesn't have the same main character in every scene, and as such it feels like an anthology. It's a pretty obvious indication for whenever they decide to continue the TV series. The first arc will obviously be the adaptation of this movie, since it was written like a series. The plot stops jumping around in the second third of the movie, and it begins with the laziest way imaginable. Frisia's men steal the Dragon Balls from Bulma, exactly as they did in Resurrection of F. Why bother with new ideas when you can keep reusing the exact same ones in every movie? And speaking of lazy, they didn't do a thing with any of the secondary cast. 90% of the characters don't even appear, and Beerus turned from the terrifying god of destruction into a babysitter who does nothing to stop a monster capable of destroying the whole universe. Also, remember when he was bullying King Vegeta in the first movie? What happened to that plot point? He wasn't shown in the past, and they didn't elaborate on why he didn't destroy the Saiyans himself. How lazy can you get? And then it's the comedy that tries so hard to be juvenile like it used to be in the original series, but it falls flat. Bulma wants to wish from the dragon to become a bit younger. Frisia wants to be a bit taller. Isn't that funny? Maybe it would be if they weren't the exact same jokes and the quality of the writing didn't turn to shit. Anyways, Frisia randomly finds a Saiyan which just happens to be more powerful than any other villain so far, and Frisia feels like he can kill Vegeta without proving his worth. The non-canon Broly had destroyed a galaxy in the first seconds of the movie, so he had proven to be a major threat. This Broly was just fighting crabs all his life, thus he had nothing to show his threat level. Frisia's reasoning is bullshit, but so is Dragon Ball Super as a whole, thus who gives a shit? Just sit back and watch Broly fighting Goku and Vegeta while constantly getting stronger because power levels are bullshit and everyone only cares about the light show. Toriyama tried to make it seem like Broly snapped after seeing the death of his father as some sort of an excuse to get super powerful in an instant, but since the emotions between father and son were convoluted, it wasn't much of an excuse. On one hand, Paragus loved his son and sacrificed a lot to find him, on the other hand, he was using him as a tool for his revenge. And Broly on one hand hated his father for using him as a tool, but on the other he got really pissed when he died. You can't even tell what the hell is going on. Everybody loves the new Broly for having a personality and shit, and yet the older Broly made sense as a character because he was just a one-dimensional, battle-crazy maniac. Laugh all you want with his motivation for hating Goku being him crying a lot, but it still made more sense than the shit we see in the new Broly. I mean, he's not someone who became the legendary Super Saiyan by getting stronger as he was gradually destroying a whole freaking galaxy. He's a mortal with zero battle experience who can kick the crap out of warriors with God Ki, which were constantly fighting and improving all their lives. Jumping from average Joe to rivaling the God of Destruction in a few minutes is what destroys all the gravity behind the concept of getting stronger. And then comes the fan service moment of the movie by rehashing yet another transformation that wasn't canon up until this point. Fusion Dance is back, and so is Gogeta after a quick training session by Piccolo. Because they didn't think about getting Potara earrings from the Chaos planet, or telling Beerus to stop being a babysitter and do something for a change. By the way, just like any power-up in Super, it was meaningless since it never defeats the big bad. The battle ended with a plot device for yet another time, so basically the entire fight was meaningless. They could just wish from the dragon to teleport Broly away since the very beginning. So the fight is over and nothing makes sense even then. Broly magically loses his anger when he returns to his planet. Frieza is allowed to leave and continue his galactic extermination, and nobody on Earth felt there was a fight going on, even after an entire ice continent vaporized and caused who knows how much climatic change. Oh, and the best part is how Broly is now a good guy, and will fight along with Goku in the following arc. Because this is the modern Dragon Ball, where we have to become good friends with everyone we fight. Isn't that wonderful, children? What a load of crock.
Best of the year.
So I watched the latest Dragon Ball movie, and I am not gonna show you any footage of it, because it almost always gets claimed. It looks bad anyways. The CGI animation, an attempt to save money since the studio knows a lot of people are going to watch it no matter how cheap it looks, is definitely going to be a turn-off for most who like the far more polished look of the Broly film. It is not terrible, but having to get used to that after 25 years of being 2D ain't easy. And the animators knew that, since whenever there is a flashback to previous events, they keep it in 2D since they know people will be pissed if they see nostalgic moments in a completely different style. Anyways, assuming that is not a problem for you and you expect to see 2 hours worth of non-stop action, which is what Dragon Ball has become after plot and characters became an afterthought, be prepared for a very long and overall dull build-up. There's a lot of talking in the first half of the movie since the bad guys keep flashing back to previous events and plotting their next move. Nobody watches or cares about such things in a Dragon Ball movie. Once that is over, the bad guys created 2 androids that magically match in power Gohan and Piccolo. Don't ask why, it was already a stretch to have androids with more power than a Super Saiyan back in the Android Saga. The Red Ribbon can simply collect data and create androids that are as powerful as the current heroes with no cap. Go figure. The fight between the heroes and the new androids is tensionless, since nothing feels like it's at stake. The world doesn't look like it's in any danger, and even Pan fools around when she gets kidnapped just for motivating her daddy to try harder. The final boss ends up being a buffed up Cell. Don't get too excited, because he's in his second form and completely mindless compared to his predecessor. The battle is eventually won with the heroes getting new transformations, Piccolo turning yellow, Gohan getting longer silver hair for protecting a daughter that was never in any real danger. How unfortunate they couldn't do that in the previous arcs, when the world was in actual danger. It's not like they were training non-stop since that event. The power-ups were done automatically with no training. Then the villains turn allies because it's a show for kids. As for the powerhouses of the show, Goku and Vegeta, they spend the whole movie in Beerus' place training along with Broly. And don't expect something to come out of that, they are not doing anything and they conveniently never find out about what happens on Earth. Essentially, they are filler. Man, can you imagine not finding out about when Frieza attacked? Earth would be gone because they were careless. And that was several arcs ago. Goku and Vegeta are 1,000 times more powerful since that time, and yet they are less careful. What an amazing character development, they become more and more stupid. Oh, and Broly is now a doormat. A completely emotionless soy boy. That pseudo-Cell they were fighting was acting like Broly more than Broly was acting like himself. Here is the actual problem with the movie. It was made to look like a Dokkan gacha game. Its gamers will appreciate it far more than plain watchers. The plot is nothing to bother thinking about, the new power-ups are lazy, and there is not much to get from it besides an excuse for more units in the gacha game. It's an overall below-average movie in a franchise that is way beyond its prime and runs purely on milking nostalgia. Said nostalgia won't even look nice from here on, since it won't even be 2D. Dragon Ball of today is a mutated zombie that doesn't resemble the show we all grew up with in the 90s. There is no blood anymore, energy blasts don't kill anyone anymore, nobody's an angry macho man anymore, they are all friendly soy boys, and now everyone looks like a polygon gacha unit. Fuck that shit. Let's make this clearer right from the start. Daima was a cash grab that nobody wanted and few watched. It was made just to canonize Super Saiyan 4 the same way the Broly movie was made to canonize the filler villain. Toriyama in general spent his last years in rehashing all ideas, making the line from the opening song, "Here comes a brand new story," to be deceptive. Daima is part of Toriyama's attempt to incorporate a lot of non-canon ideas into canon, but since he's not a good writer, he did a crappy job. Not only Daima contradicts pretty much everything that has been canon for decades, it doesn't even fit with the super continuity. The way the Potara earrings work changed, the origin of the Dragonballs and Majin Buu changed, and Piccolo doesn't even know how to speak Namekian anymore. It also has no explanation for why Goku never uses Super Saiyan 4 in Super, or why Kaioshin is not fused again. It will piss off anyone who still thinks Dragon Ball is consistent with its rules. Not that it ever was or it matters at this point. Although Daima expands the lore by delving into the Demon Realm and the origin of the Namekians, that doesn't mean a thing because no one gives a shit about the setting. A dozen universes were introduced in Super, they were left completely unexplored, and nobody complained when the Tournament of Power began. Because Dragon Ball is all about the fighting, not exploration. It is not One Piece or Tower of God, it's Goku changing hair colors and exchanging energy beams with a villain. Plus there have been so many fanfic stories over the decades to the point the canon lore doesn't matter anymore. Heck, Xenoverse and Sparkling Zero are nothing but what-if scenarios, yet nobody complained about the breaching of canon. Heck, not even Daima cares. What matters the most is if people wanted Daima, and the answer is they didn't. When it was first announced, everybody quickly yelled, "We want Moro!" meaning they wanted the next arc of Super to be adopted. Daima, like GT, is a cash grab. And if it had never been made, nobody would miss a thing. Not even calling it a send-off or a passion project of Toriyama is enough to excuse its existence. Nobody cares about anything else the late mangaka made, from Dragon Quest to Blue Dragon to even the very recent Sandland. And they certainly don't care about silly gag comedies that involve Muppet Baby-like versions of characters from the battle manga they love. Let's be honest, people only care about Dragon Ball even if Toriyama isn't involved. Daima is GT 2.0, with Goku once again being back to a kid through a wish from the dragon and him traveling to distant lands in a spaceship to undo it. Despite many others becoming babies along with him, the premise did not change. At the same time, it is not a return to the style of the original series, when Goku was still a kid and there was a lot of adventure instead of constant Super Saiyan transformations and energy beams. Daima is chock full of transformations and energy beams, and it also doesn't feel like the original series in the slightest. We got the adventure aspect and the design of Goku, but not the personality he had as a kid, or the type of comedy the original show was using. The jokes were in general too sanitized. Even if you like the vulgar Dr. Slump type of comedy Dragon Ball used to have at first, this is not a return to that kind of humor. It's safe and inoffensive, making it dull and unmemorable. And the show in general was a chore to watch, with the idea of Goku becoming a kid again not sitting well with the audience. Narrative-wise was done to depower him, but aesthetic-wise, the Muppet Baby type of designs didn't look nice. It's the adult forms everybody liked, not the chibi ones. Also, your average Dragon Ball fan only cares about action and transformations, not a bunch of brats doing goofy things. Everyone else becoming kids didn't matter either, since Toriyama didn't do anything with it. It was just there as a joke for the first episode, and then didn't play a role for the rest of the series. The fights were a hollow spectacle and they didn't have the epicness of Z, since everyone looks dumb and the threats are barely felt. Nothing was at stake in this show, since the good guys didn't even mind being kids. In fact, they loved it. On top of that, there was no time limit that would lead to Earth blowing up like in GT. So yeah, no tension, no pressure of time, no stakes, nothing. And Daima is still the Goku show, with Vegeta being the jealous boyfriend. Despite featuring around 100 named characters, everyone beyond those two is just there to offer exposition or gasp at how strong Goku and Vegeta are. Most of the older cast is left on Earth where you never see them again after the first episode. Gohan in specific doesn't even exist, further proving how much Toriyama regretted making him the new protagonist for a while. Others like Piccolo, Bulma and Shin come along for the heck of it, without offering a thing to the plot. New characters like Glorio and Pansy were initially important, for taking the main characters to other places with their airship and explaining the situation of the demon world, but once Goku began flying again, he didn't need them anymore, and he sure didn't care about the world he was in. On the villain side, we get Goma, who is basically Pilaf with a clown head, a completely unthreatening gag character. And his lieutenants, Arinsu and Degasu, seem to have a hidden agenda that would complicate things, but it never went anywhere and the plot remained fairly silly and straightforward. The challenges were in general very easy to overcome, so Toriyama had to artificially make some situations to seem more dangerous than what they actually were. We were supposed to believe Super Saiyans, who can blow up planets with a finger, couldn't deal with a big child or a normal soldiers with laser guns. Such moments were not only insulting the audience, they were also clearly done to stretch a fairly simple mission to 5 times its natural duration. Just how many episodes were wasted on their airship breaking down and them having to walk? How many minutes of every episode were wasted on characters that don't shut up and explain everything even when something is obvious? Not to mention the plot points which were dropped entirely, such the fusion bugs that were constantly mentioned made everybody to expect fusion, and then it never happened. The highlights as usual ended up being the major battles with the Guardian robots and the Big Bad, but even those had to be artificially made to seem harder than what they actually were. One of the robots was given a power-up out of nowhere just so we can have a fan service moment with Vegeta turning Super Saiyan 3, and Goma finds this completely broken eye that instantly turns him from a nobody to someone more powerful than a Super Saiyan 3. The tradition of people gaining power-ups with no effort and devaluing the earlier arcs when training and never giving up were pivotal continues. Basically, there is no build-up to the highlights, the power-ups feel unearned, and the battles end up being superficial because of it. For all these reasons, I place Daima even lower than GT, which was also a cash grab, but came out at a time when people were starving for more Dragon Ball. GT also came out during the 90s, where options were limited to what you could watch on television. This is not the case anymore. Now you can watch anything you want, from any year, and at every time of the day you fancy. Who would turn his head towards Daima when Sparkling Zero came out at the same time, with every character of every arc and 100 what-if stories? Does it have the best writing? No. But that is not what fans of the series want. They are pleased with seeing Goku changing hair colors and exchanging energy beams with a villain. Therefore, who gives a dime about this piece of shit? It's awful. This entire franchise is awful. I hate it.